Connor, hit me with some gospel music. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. My roommate, Connor, ladies and gentlemen, take a bow. Hell yeah. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a very special episode of Atheist Church Audit. My name is Jared, I'm an atheist, and this morning I went to the world's smallest Pentecostal church. Falls of Noose Pentecostal Holiness Church is kind of like the quintessential backwoods country Pentecostal church.
Oh, we out in the sticks, boy.
That old-time revival, that old-time gospel, that preaching and hollering.
It's not the people that you don't know is going to cause your heart to eat, to hurt.
And it was a hoot. It was a blast. I'm just going to say this off the bat. This is the type of church that people like to make fun of. This is the type of church that people like to go to and crap on the people, crap on the theology, crap on the church itself. And if you're new here, that is not what I do. I'll poke fun at it, all in good faith though, because this was like the spitting image of the church that I grew up in. So if you're new here, and I assume you are, let's get this out of the way from the get-go. This channel is not about making fun of people, making fun of religion, making fun of churches. I'm an atheist, but I really love religion and I love religious people. So let's get into it. Finding this church and finding how and when to get to this church was an ordeal. This church does not have a website. They do have a Facebook account, but it didn't have their times of service on it. So rather than finding the worship times online and pulling up to the dedicated visitor parking space, there was not one. And also it doesn't really matter. Instead, I had to go onto Google Street View and do some detective sleuthing and zoom in to the picture of their little sign out front and squint really hard to barely make out the 10 a.m. Sunday school time. So it's 10 a.m., it's daylight savings time, so it felt like 9 a.m. I walk in and there are a total of 9 people in the building.
9, Mama.
I walk in and it was very clear that I was a new face there. And literally every single person stood up, turned around, and shook my hand. So I was very well acquainted with everyone in the church. I thought that, oh, well, this is just Sunday school, but there's going to be more people who come to the actual worship service. Nope. There were 9 people at this church. I was number 10. You thought the 12 disciples were intimate. Woof. Cut down 2 of them, and you got a tight-knit group there. So I want to talk about the vibe of this church.
The vibe that night was incredible.
Last week, I was very, very harsh on a Mormon church that I went to. I don't think I've ever visited a church where I have seen less of a positive impact in a community. And I was harsh on them because the vibe, the atmosphere was just so depressing and sad. This wasn't that. I think the vibe and the atmosphere were actually pretty positive given how small the congregation was. I've been to small churches like this. Hell, I grew up in a church exactly like this, and it's very easy for things to feel discouraging and lackluster when there's not a whole lot of people showing up to your church. So in spite of that, it felt, good. It felt pretty lively. So even though the atmosphere in the church was positive, I think what's depressing isn't so much the church itself, but the situation that this church and all of these churches like it find themselves in. So again, I'm not here to crap on this church. I'm not here to crap on these people. That's not what I do. But I do want to bring up the fact that, churches like this find themselves in a weird predicament. As I'm pulling up to this very small church, the road leading up to it has a big sign that says dead end. And it felt a little bit like an omen. So first and foremost, everyone there was really warm and welcoming to me. I know because I shook literally every single hand in that church. Sunday school was very communal. It was, hey, let's read this passage, let's go through our devotional guide, and let's, kind of pep up and, give our thoughts about the scriptures and this and that. And everyone was contributing and it was pretty positive. I think what's fascinating and interesting about being in a congregation this small is that it really highlights the fact that when you go to a church, you're not meeting one type of people. It's not just, oh, it's religious people or, oh, it's Pentecostals. You start to see very clearly that there's individual characters in this church. There's the pastor who probably watches too much Fox News, but is, pretty sweet. His 80-year-old wife, the pastor was 70. There was the mechanic who was also a worship leader. And there was a guy with some, pretty obvious mental health challenges there. And I think that's super important to remember anytime you go to a church, a cathedral, a mosque, a temple, is that you're still dealing with people, and those people are going to, talk about the religion differently. They're going to portray it differently. They're going to represent it differently. And you always have to kind of filter that through, or else you're going to walk away thinking, ugh, I met a Muslim once. Woof. And I think it's equally unfair to, brush off Christians or Pentecostals by just, meeting one of them and being like, bleh. If I'm totally honest, this was a little bit of a difficult experience for me because it made me reminisce about my backwoods Pentecostal church that I went to growing up. I became a believer when I was 13 years old, and I went to a backwoods Pentecostal Foursquare church that looked exactly like this. It smelled like cigarettes and mildew, just like this church. The people were largely blue collar, and there wasn't, a super heavy emphasis on education. And I don't know how to say that and not sound like a dick, but it just is what it is, like these people are scraping by. They don't have the luxury of going to Yale and getting their MDiv. And my experience growing up in a church like this was very mixed. It gave me structure, it gave me some friends-ish. I sound like such an old man saying this, but when I was a kid, when I was a young whippersnapper, I would ride my bike to church every Sunday. I want to ride my bicycle. And all the old ladies in my church, they just ate that shit up. They would always be like, oh, you rode your bike through the snow just to hear the word of God. It was sweet and endearing. As the years went on, I was the only kid in my youth group that didn't get pregnant out of wedlock. And eventually I was pretty much the only person under 20 there. And then you have some changes in leadership, and before you know it, you have a congregation of between 10 and 50 people. And I think for me, it's a really painful memory remembering how lonely that feels. And things like church attendance are always an ebb and flow. People will come, people will go. And talking to the pastor, there was something similar that happened to this church where, he said that they used to bring in about 40 people a week, but then COVID hit and a lot of the old people didn't really feel safe coming after that. And then some people just kind of got in the habit of not coming, and next thing you know, you're 9 people in a church. And there's a part of me that felt really crappy even going to this church because invariably you go to a church like this and everyone's like, oh, please come back next Sunday. You gotta come back next Sunday. They have that glimmer of hope that, oh, maybe this is the start of more people coming back to church and having to smile and say we'll see. But I think the situation that's sad is just, I don't know where congregations like this go from here. The pastor's sermon hit me as a little bit ironic. He preached from that verse out of Hebrews that says Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And it was that exact verse that was engraved onto a giant plaque that sat at the front of my church. But his sermon was about Jesus being timeless and how Jesus has something to offer every generation, from the first century until now into forever. Jesus is the same, and he has something to offer the world. And I contrast that with an interaction that I had with the pastor right before the church service. We got into a conversation and I pulled up ChatGPT on my phone and I just started showing him ChatGPT because he had never seen it before. And his mind was blown. And he was like, it's doing that in real time? No way. I think it's just scary seeing the world change so fast and technology evolve so quickly. And I feel like the Christian world is constantly trying to play catch up in how do we respond to the porn epidemic, or how do we respond to, advances in technology and healthcare and world economics and nuclear warfare. What does the Bible have to say about it? And especially for people who are not super highly educated in this, they don't have an amazing response. I mean, realistically, what will probably happen with a church like this is give it 10 more years, the pastor passes away, and the remnants of this church, they disperse into other more modern, larger congregations. And maybe that's just the natural way of life, but I don't know, it just feels sad. So it's difficult for me to say, what is this church doing wrong or what should it be doing better? Because I just don't know that there's a place in the world for churches like this anymore.
That's a lot of beating. Amen.
It's hard for me to say what this church is doing right or wrong. It doesn't feel like they have a say in the matter. It was clear that church was good for these people. I don't know, maybe not great, but it meant something to them. They were really there for it. I've been to some churches where the people were just so miserable and it's clear, like, you guys just want to blow your brains out, just leave, like, it's not worth your time. But this was worth their time. And it was also clear that they were friends outside of church and that they were doing life together. I hate that phrase. And so even just imagining for a minute that this church was perfect and that they were doing everything right, it's just sad to see, a community like this kind of dwindle. So I don't really know that I have any grand takeaway on what this church should or shouldn't do better. I mean, I'm just kind of bemoaning small church vibes. This church is really hard to rate because I'm sure if I stuck around longer, I feel like the pastor would be the type to let some stuff slip that I'm not sure I would vibe with. But everyone was super warm, they were welcoming, they were sincere, they were passionate despite their modest numbers. But if a young Pentecostal came to me and asked where they should go to church, I don't know that I could recommend them to this space. I feel like they need more resources. They need mentors who are highly trained in theology. They need youth programs and community help and all of these things that this church just isn't able to offer. And it's kind of the catch-22, right? Of like, well, this church doesn't have those resources because people don't come to the church, and then people don't come to this church because they don't have those resources. So yeah, maybe that's my grand takeaway, is that if you're a young, zealous Pentecostal, maybe you are the person who can go and breathe life into a place like this. Let's just call it a split, and we'll give it 3 out of 5 Caesar salads. That wraps up another Atheist Church Audit. My name is Jared. I'm an atheist. Go to church.